Damaging Ailments in Path of Exile 2 use a system that's completely different to the one used in PoE 1. This video is going to cover each of the damaging ailments in detail, that's Ignite, Poison and Bleeding, and each ailment also has its own detailed written guide on Mobalytics. They're linked down below if you're interested. But before we get into each ailment specifically, we need to look at some fundamental mechanics for all damaging ailments. So when thinking about damaging ailments in Path of Exile 2, I like to look at them in a three-part process. You have the hit which inflicts the ailment, the resulting ailment and its magnitude, and lastly, the damage the entity takes from the ailment. Breaking damaging ailments down into these three parts makes the system much easier to understand and will help with knowing how and how not to scale the damage dealt by those ailments. Okay, so firstly, there's the hit that inflicts the ailment. You can check out my full order of operations guide for more details on this step in terms of how exactly damage is calculated, but what you need to know here is that all of your personal damage modifiers are applied to the hit at this stage. So any increased damage, for example, from the passive skill tree, any more damage multipliers, anything that you have on your character that will improve the damage of that hit is applied at this stage. And this is really important because your damage modifiers are only applied once, and it happens right here. They're not applied a second time directly to the ailment itself. This is why in PoE 2, scaling your hit damage can directly scale the inflicted ailment, because once all of your damage modifiers have been applied to the hit, the damage of that hit is then used to calculate the magnitude of the inflicted ailment. So that's the simple overview of this step. Anything that will boost the damage of the hit will in turn affect the inflicted ailment. So that includes your damage modifiers, as we've already mentioned. It also includes if the hit's a critical hit, as that will then be boosted by critical damage bonus, and it includes if the hit deals double or triple damage, and so on. But it doesn't include any modifiers that are on the target, even if those modifiers would make the target take more damage from that hit. We'll get onto that part in just a moment, but these modifiers come in a little later on. What you need to know is that at this stage, they don't matter. And that's because the calculation of how much damage the ailment is going to deal, i.e. its magnitude, happens before the hit interacts with anything that would affect how much damage the target takes. That includes their mitigation layers such as resistance, and it includes any debuffs you've applied to them as well. None of those things are relevant for the calculation of how much damage the ailment is going to deal. So, to summarise this step, you have the hit which is scaled by all of your personal damage modifiers, and before that hit interacts with anything on the target, such as mitigation, it's used to calculate the ailment. Moving on to part 2. This is the resulting ailment and its magnitude. Magnitude is a term that's being used to essentially describe the strength of an ailment. It's how much damage a damaging ailment is dealing relative to the hit that inflicted it. So, we'll get on to the specifics of how much magnitude each of the ailments have in a moment when we cover each of them in detail. But all you need to know for this step is that the ailment has already been created from step 1, and your damage modifiers will not directly scale the damage that the ailment deals. Instead, the only way you can directly modify how much damage a damaging ailment will deal is by using modifiers that improve the magnitude of that ailment. The majority of these modifiers grant increases to the magnitude of an ailment, and they are summed together before being applied. You can think of these as multipliers to how much damage an ailment deals specifically. So if you have 100% increased magnitude of an ailment, it would essentially have double the base magnitude. Now, aside from magnitude modifiers, the only other modifier that interacts with ailment magnitude directly is the effect of an ailment, which is a much rarer stat and is a multiplier to the magnitude of an ailment. For example, if you had 100% increased magnitude of an ailment, you'd have an ailment with 200% base magnitude. If you then had 50% increased effect of that ailment, you'd have an ailment with 300% base magnitude. Notice that the effect modifier is a multiplier to total magnitude and is not additive with the more common increased magnitude modifier. So, to summarise, at this step the ailment cannot be further modified by your personal damage modifiers as they were already applied in step 1, but anything that you have that will scale the ailment magnitude directly is applied to boost the damage that this ailment will deal. Moving on to the final step, the damage dealt by the ailment to the target. Now, this is where you can actually improve how much damage the target is going to take from the ailment. And that's because once the ailment is applied to the target, the damage that it deals now must pass through the target's mitigation layers, such as resistance. So anything that you can apply to the target to make them take more damage will improve the damage dealt by that ailment. These modifiers won't scale the ailment directly, but they will scale the damage the target takes from the ailment. For example, lowering their resistances with curses or shocking them to make them take increased damage. So to summarize, at this step you can apply debuffs to the target to make them take more damage from the ailment. Okay, so that's a basic overview of damaging ailment mechanics. And I like to view it in this simple 3-step process, even though in reality all of this kind of happens very quickly together. Now let's move on to each ailment specifically, beginning with Ignite. So Ignite is a damaging elemental ailment that deals fire damage over time and lasts for 4 seconds by default. Only one instance of Ignite on a target will deal damage at a time, and this will be the one that deals the highest damage. Now, inflicting Ignite is not a simple added chance-based system from modifiers, and is instead tied to ailment threshold. The chance to inflict Ignite is 1% per 4% of the target's ailment threshold that the hit would deal, and ailment threshold is normally tied directly to maximum life, except in the case of monsters with much higher life pools, such as bosses, where their ailment threshold is scaled to allow players to apply ailments to them. So whenever you see modifiers that grant you an increased chance to ignite, these are not adding to your chance to ignite. They're instead multiplying the chance that a hit has to ignite based on the size of the hit versus the target's ailment threshold. Importantly, by default, only the fire damage in a hit will contribute to this ignite chance. Now, the base magnitude of Ignite is 20% of the total fire damage of the hit, dealt as fire damage per second. And this number can be scaled with modifiers to Ignite magnitude, directly multiplying how much of the hit contributes to the damage dealt by Ignite. Poison is a damaging ailment that deals chaos damage over time and lasts for 2 seconds by default. The damage dealt by this ailment directly bypasses energy shield. Only one instance of poison on a target will deal damage at a time, but you can scale the amount of poisons that you can inflict on a target with relevant modifiers, and therefore the highest damage poisons will inflict their damage, up to the cap on the amount of poisons you can inflict. Now, the chance to inflict poison is a much simpler added chance-based system gained from modifiers, so these modifiers will be summed to provide your chance to poison on hit. However, there are also modifiers that increase your chance to inflict ailments, and these will act as a multiplier for your chance to poison. The base magnitude of poison is 20% of the total combined physical and chaos damage of the hit, dealt as chaos damage per second. This number can be scaled by modifiers to poison magnitude, directly multiplying how much of a hit contributes to the damage dealt by poison. Now, here's a really important note that's relevant for all damaging ailments, but it's especially notable for poison, because this one is going to trip a lot of people up, especially those coming from PoE 1. Poison can be inflicted with physical or chaos, or both damage types. But let's just say you're inflicting poison with a pure physical damage hit. If you have modifiers which increase your chaos damage, these will not apply to the hit because you're only dealing physical damage, and therefore they will also not apply to the inflicted poison even though it deals chaos damage. This is because your damage modifiers are only applied once to the hit. They're not applied a second time to the ailment itself, so be careful with that one. Only invest into damage modifiers that will scale the hit and therefore also scale the ailment. Okay, so lastly there's Bleeding, which is a damaging ailment that deals physical damage over time and lasts for 5 seconds by default. The damage dealt by Bleeding directly bypasses energy shield. Chance to inflict Bleeding uses an added chance-based system which will sum all relevant modifiers to provide your chance to inflict Bleeding on hit. Any modifiers which provide increased chance to inflict ailments will multiply your chance to inflict Bleeding. The base magnitude of bleeding is 15% of the total physical damage of the hit, and this number can then be scaled by modifiers to bleeding magnitude, directly multiplying how much of the hit contributes to the damage dealt by bleeding. Now, bleeding also has a special mechanic that makes the target take double damage from the ailment while they're moving. You can force the double damage mechanic by aggravating the bleeding on the target, which will make the aggravated bleed deal double damage for the rest of its duration. A target that is both moving and suffering from an aggravated bleed will not have the bonus damage applied to them twice. Now, for all damaging ailments, you can scale their durations with relevant modifiers. Scaling the duration of an ailment will make it deal more damage over the full duration, but not more damage per second. You can also use modifiers to make damaging ailments deal their damage faster. These will make the ailments deal their full damage over a shorter period of time, improving DPS but shortening the duration. And that's it, damaging ailments in Path of Exile 2. They're handled very differently to PoE 1, so hopefully this was helpful in understanding those differences. Thanks for watching this video, and as always, stay tuned and stay safe.